Hi everyone. Tonight, we're stepping into a world where the lights have just gone out. Not your bedroom lamp. Those haven't been invented yet. But the metaphorical torch that was the Roman Empire. You're not in a familiar world anymore. The roads are cracked, the libraries are quiet, and the aqueducts? Let's just say you're better off drinking from a muddy pond. You're in the early Middle Ages. It's chilly. Everything smells like damp wool and goat. And your neighbors might be former Roman citizens, or barbarian warriors, or both. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Let me know your location and local time in the comments. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's enjoy our ride tonight. You wake up in a ditch, not metaphorically, in an actual ditch, the kind dug along an overgrown Roman road that nobody's maintained in, about a century. The gravel cuts your side, the dew has soaked through your tunic, and something might have nibbled your boots during the night. You stand up, groggy, and scan your surroundings. The forest is creeping in on all sides. Even the road beneath you seems embarrassed to be a road. You're somewhere in Gaul. Or is it Francia now? Hard to tell. Latin's going out of fashion fast. You spot a milestone nearby, chipped, illegible. If Rome once connected this world, it's now like a forgotten group chat, once buzzing, now silent. A bird calls in the distance. Or is that someone shouting? You tighten the frayed leather belt at your waist and start walking. You don't have a horse. Those are expensive now. And besides, most of them were eaten during the last siege. Welcome to Western Europe, around the year 500 CE. The empire in the west has collapsed. The emperors? Gone. The legions? Disbanded or hired out as glorified muscle to whoever's richest. What's left is a messy patchwork of kingdoms, chiefdoms, and small communities, trying very hard not to die of starvation or get murdered in their sleep. You pass what used to be a Roman villa. Vines have claimed it. A wild boar stares at you from a crumbled archway and snorts as if to say, "Nice empire. Shame what happened to it." Inside the villa, a family has made a home, sort of. They've patched up the broken columns with logs, and the tile mosaic is now a patchy floor for chickens. The paterfamilias is now just that guy with the sword and the 2 goats. Nobody here remembers Roman law, but they do remember the name of the bishop 3 villages over, because he's the only one who can read. The idea of Europe as a unified world has cracked. Trade routes have withered. The roads are unsafe. Every journey, like yours, is a gamble. Do you make it to the next village? Or do bandits make you disappear in the woods forever? Historians still debate whether the fall of Rome was a sudden collapse or a slow fading. But for you, right now, it feels pretty sudden. You finally arrive at a settlement. It's not a town, not yet. More like a tightly clustered collection of huts behind a sad wooden wall. You show up hungry. They show up suspicious. One man with a magnificent beard and no teeth asks if you're a spy for the Saxons. You tell him you're just lost. He tells you so is everyone these days. You're allowed inside after being thoroughly sniffed by a very judgmental dog. Inside, life is simple. One-room huts, smoke curling out from holes in the roof, chickens pecking at everything, including you. The food? Boiled everything. Flavoring is a luxury. Teeth are optional. But there's music, a flute made of bone, and stories. Oh, the stories. Without Rome's bureaucracy, oral tradition is back in fashion. People tell tales of saints, demons, heroic ancestors, and magical springs. You wonder how much is true? Then again, your options for fact-checking are limited. Religion is your anchor now. Christianity is rising, not just as a personal faith, but as a social glue. The village priest can't explain complex theology, but he knows how to scare you into behaving. You attend Mass in a crumbling Roman temple, converted into a chapel. The columns still stand, awkwardly, like old men at a rave. Outside, a storm rumbles. The villagers huddle together and pray. Lightning is a divine sign. You're not sure from whom or about what, but you nod along. It's safer that way. The biggest building in the village isn't a house. It's the bishop's home. The bishop owns land, gives orders, and sends letters written on dried sheepskin. You sneak a peek at one. It's in Latin. You squint. All those years of Roman schooling, gone. If you can read your own name, you're already in the top 1%. Occasionally, a warband comes through. They claim to be protectors. More often, they take food and 2 chickens and leave everyone worse off. You stay quiet when they pass. You learn not to make eye contact. You've noticed something strange. Most of the power lies with people who own land, can read, or carry a sword. Sometimes all 3. If you're none of those people, well, you might want to reconsider your career path. Unfortunately, traveling podcast host isn't an option yet. A monk visits your village. His robes are patched, his face weathered. He carries a book, an actual book. The kids stare. You stare. He speaks of a monastery far away where men copy texts, pray in silence, and bake excellent bread. You think about joining? But then he mentions the no talking part, and you politely decline. The seasons pass. Winters are brutal. No central heating, no preserved food. You huddle with animals for warmth. Charming. Until the goat farts. One morning, you see a Roman milestone topple. Just fall over like it finally gave up pretending everything's okay. You feel the same way. But then, a child laughs somewhere. A blacksmith hammers iron into a new plowshare. A woman sings a lullaby in a mix of Latin and something new. Frankish? Lombard? Hard to say. But it's beautiful. And so life goes on. You keep walking. Always walking. Maybe east to where the sun still rises over Constantinople. Or south, where tales of a new prophet in the desert are spreading like fire. You don't know what's coming, but you're about to walk straight into it. You don't make it far before you're invited to dinner by a man with suspiciously polished boots and a sword too shiny for someone living in a wooden house. His name is Theobald, which sounds noble until you find out everyone in this region is named Theobald. He tells you he's a Rex, a king. You look around his muddy patch of pig-filled land and wonder what exactly he rules besides mosquitoes. Still, you accept his invitation. Not that you had much of a choice. When a man with 5 sons and a herd of wolves, disguised as dogs, says, "Join us for supper," you join. Inside the hall, okay, it's a barn with delusions of grandeur. You see what counts as luxury in this post-Roman world. Tapestries that double as insulation, drinking horns that once belonged to someone's grandfather, and a very drunk bard snoring in the corner. Dinner is being ladled from a cauldron big enough to drown in. The smell is bold, something between turnips and regret. You sit down next to a man wearing a wolf pelt and a girl who hasn't blinked since you entered. You ask if they're related. No one answers. Instead, Theobald raises a horn of something fermented and slurs. To the Goths. You don't correct him by saying this isn't a Goth kingdom. That would be rude and possibly fatal. The fall of Rome left a vacuum, and it got filled fast. Tribes once considered barbaric now wear crowns. The Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, Lombards, and Franks are all fighting over scraps of Roman greatness. Some try to imitate the empire, others mock it. Most just want land and a tax base. Here in Gaul, Francia, the Merovingians are calling the shots. King Clovis, who sounds like a man sneezing, converted to Christianity about a century ago and made his pagan rivals nervous. You hear tales about him, how he once prayed to Christ before a battle and won, how he had a habit of murdering relatives who got too ambitious, and how his hair was rumored to grant divine power. Hair, by the way, is a big deal right now. If you're royal, you grow it long. If you're a peasant, you cut it short. If you're a monk, you shave a hole in the middle of your scalp and hope no one laughs. You ask your hosts about the Roman past. One man says his grandfather saw a Roman aqueduct once. Another swears his uncle fought in a real legion. Whether they're lying or confused, you can't tell. But the ghost of Rome is everywhere. Its roads still guide your steps. Its ruins house your chickens. Its coins are still being melted into brooches. And yet, no one really understands it anymore. Latin is fading. In its place are early versions of French, Spanish, Italian, half-evolved tongues, spoken in 10 dialects per valley. You barely understand anyone, and you're only 50 miles from your last conversation. Theobald boasts of his lineage, descended from a great warrior who once sacked Milan. Or maybe he meant millet. Again, hard to tell. He talks about how the Franks are destined to rule all of Gaul. Then he belches and knocks over a candle. You help put out the small fire before it becomes a big one. As you do, you notice the tapestry on the wall isn't just decorative. It's Roman military fabric, reused and restitched. There's an eagle faintly visible beneath the wool, a ghost of empire hiding in plain sight. You sleep on hay. You dream of marble buildings and aqueducts that don't leak. Then you wake to someone shouting about stolen pigs. You step outside and realize the tribe next door is attacking, not with an army, just angry cousins on horses. You duck as a spear whizzes past your head and embeds itself in a wooden post. Theobald is out there screaming. His sons are trying to find their swords. One grabs a broom by mistake. It's chaos. You crawl behind the barrel, and wonder if this is the new normal. Historians still debate whether the so-called Dark Ages were really that dark. But right now, under a smoky sky and with a dead pig falling next to you, it sure feels a little dim. Theobald's side wins. Barely. Mostly because the other side got distracted, looting a beehive. You help bandage wounds with torn linen and silently vow to sleep somewhere less tabby tomorrow. After the battle, you meet a strange man with a scroll. He's dressed differently, more Roman than Frank. Turns out, he's a scribe, one of the few still preserving what remains of the old world. He writes in Latin and carries ink in a horn. You watch as he copies a contract between Theobald and a neighboring duke over grain rights. The contract is barely legible, full of spelling errors and contradictory clauses. But it's something. Proof that law, however twisted, still breathes. You join the scribe on his journey. He tells you stories, some true, some borrowed. He says he once saw the city of Ravenna, where mosaics still glitter in churches like trapped stars. You ask if that's where civilization still lives. He just shrugs. One night, you camp by a Roman milestone. This one's upright, carved letters still sharp. It says, "The Emperor Trajan passed this way." You stare at it like a fossil. Did people once really believe in progress? Roads that led somewhere? The scribe smiles sadly. "The world broke," he says. "Now we live in the cracks." You wake to a sound. Chanting. A band of monks passes by, barefoot, singing hymns in Latin. They carry relics wrapped in cloth and avoid eye contact. You're told they're fleeing a war in the south. Again. You lose track of which war. You cross through lands once Roman, now divided like a shattered dish. Each shard has its own customs, currency, and cruelty. You pass through Lombard lands, where men wear bear skins and drink from carved horns. In Saxon territory, you see women ruling villages while men raid the coast. In Iberia, you hear whispers of new invaders from the desert, but you haven't seen them yet. Everywhere, there's rebuilding and forgetting. People rebuild walls with Roman stones. They forget who the emperors were. They baptize wells, repurpose temples, rename cities. You see Roman statues beheaded, their bodies now just decorative columns in churches. The scribe dies suddenly. Fever, maybe. You bury him beneath a pine tree and take his scroll case. It feels heavy, like a small piece of Rome, trying not to vanish. You keep walking. In a swampy village, a man tells you about a group called the Byzantines. They're the real Romans. He insists they have gold and indoor plumbing. You wonder if he's lying. Then again, Constantinople is out there, somewhere. But for now, you're stuck with Theobald's cousins, who think democracy is a demon, and who believe sneezing during a feast is an omen of war. Night falls again. The stars are bright, and you think of how far the light of Rome once reached, and how far it's dimmed. Still, there's life. People sing, babies are born, bread is baked, wolves howl, and someone makes a joke about them being better singers than the bard. Maybe the Middle Ages aren't just about collapse. Maybe they're about survival. You wrap yourself in a cloak, stitched from 3 different flags, and fall asleep beside a fire built with Roman bricks. Tomorrow, someone will call himself king again, and you'll nod and smile and ask, "What's for dinner?" You open your eyes to a sun that doesn't care whether you live in a ruined shack or a palace made of gold. Fortunately, or unfortunately, you're about to see both. Because today, your feet turn east. Western Europe is a fractured mosaic of warring kingdoms, hairy nobles, and people who think a bath is a once-a-year event. But someone out there still remembers how to be Roman. So you head toward Constantinople, the city that never stopped pretending it's the center of the universe. And to be fair, it kind of is. The journey takes weeks, across rivers, guarded by toll trolls, or just angry men with sticks, past mountain passes, full of goats and questionable soup vendors, and through villages that think the year is 300 or 700 or something. Calendars are iffy right now, but eventually, there it is, Constantinople. You crest a hill and boom, walls like teeth, domes like bubbles of heaven, and towers that sparkle even when it's cloudy. It's overwhelming. You're wearing a wool tunic that smells like feet. The people here? Silks, perfumes, and some guy just passed you riding a white camel while eating a fig. You don't belong here, but you're going in anyway. Byzantium, baby. You enter through the gates of Theodosius, marveling at how clean everything is. There's order. Guards wear matching armor. Streets are paved and not with mud. You can actually hear yourself think. It's unnerving. You cross the Maze, the main avenue, where street vendors sell roasted nuts, scrolls, and actual plumbing supplies. A priest blesses you just for making eye contact. You thank him in broken Latin. He replies in Greek. You nod politely and keep moving. Here, Rome didn't fall. It rebranded. The Eastern Roman Empire calls itself Roman without a hint of irony. But they speak Greek, worship differently, and their emperors wear crowns that look like dinner plates. The emperor right now, Justinian, and he's got ideas. Justinian is the type of guy who wakes up and says, "You know what I'll do today? Reconquer the western half of the Roman Empire." Bold. Also, a little crazy. You sneak into the Hippodrome, a massive arena where chariot races and riots happen with equal enthusiasm. People scream about team colors, blues and greens. But it's not just sports. It's politics, religion, and occasionally arson. You hear whispers. He's doing it again. Going west? No. Reorganizing the legal system. Oh, less exciting, but no joke. Justinian commissions the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, a giant cleanup job of centuries of confusing Roman legislation. It becomes the basis for a ton of future European legal systems. Even modern laws have its fingerprints. You don't realize it, but the annoying city permit you'll need in 2025? Justinian's fault. His wife, Theodora, is even more intriguing. Former actress, possibly courtesan, now empress. Fierce, smart, terrifying in a good way. She doesn't sit in the background. She rules beside him, and some say above him. You try to get closer to the palace, but are stopped by a guard who politely implies you smell like boiled onions. Fair. Instead, you wander into the Hagia Sophia, still under construction. It's a church, but it feels like a spaceship. The dome is absurdly high. Like, did we invent anti-gravity? High. Mosaics glitter. Light bounces like it's dancing. You sit on the cool marble and feel like maybe, just maybe, humans can build something beautiful again. But of course, not everything is perfect. You notice people whispering. The word plague buzzes like a mosquito. Rats skitter through the alleys. The docks reek of something worse than fish. And then, death. The plague of Justinian hits Constantinople like a hammer. It's fast, horrific. You watch carts of bodies roll down the streets while priests chant prayers they've said too many times. Historians still debate whether it was the bubonic plague or a particularly nasty flu. Doesn't matter. People die by the thousands. The city goes silent. You survive, mostly by hiding in a bakery and eating moldy bread. You don't see Justinian for weeks. Rumor says he caught it and lived. Barely. Some say he changed after that. Others say he never stopped scheming. Eventually, life limps forward. The city heals. Slowly. Justinian's wars continue. He sends generals like Belisarius to North Africa and Italy. There's some success. Rome itself is recaptured briefly. Mosaics are updated. Hope flickers. But the wars stretch the empire thin. The treasury groans. Plague returns in waves. And the dream of a reunited Roman Empire begins to crack. You sit by the sea and watch ships leave for Carthage. You hear the chant of sailors and the wail of women saying goodbye. The empire is bleeding itself dry for a memory. Still, you can't help but admire it. Byzantium is Rome's last breath, turned into song. A city where emperors think in gold and generals speak in Greek. Where saints walk in mosaics and cats patrol every rooftop like tiny imperial guards. But you know you can't stay. The West is calling. Stories of new tribes, new kings, and new chaos. And anyway, someone in the forum just stole your boots. You leave Constantinople barefoot, with a crust of bread and a stolen icon of St. Michael. You don't know it yet, but Justinian's legacy will last for centuries. His laws, his churches, even his mistakes. But the Roman dream, the unified empire, is fading. The future won't be one Rome. It'll be 100 little Romes, each claiming to be the real one. And you? You're walking straight into their arguments. You're back on the road, again. But now, the sun beats down harder. The air smells not of damp fur and stale beer, but of dust, sweat, and sweet spices carried by the wind. The language around you shifts from Latin mush to Arabic. The desert horizon rolls out before you like a sun-baked scroll. Welcome to the Middle East in the 7th century. You've arrived just in time to witness one of the most dramatic plot twists in human history. The rise of Islam. It starts not with a sword, but with a man sitting in a cave. His name is Muhammad, a merchant from Mecca who didn't quite fit in with the city's elite. Too thoughtful, too concerned with injustice, too prone to long, solitary hikes. One night, he's meditating in the cave of Hira when, according to Islamic tradition, an angel shows up and tells him to recite. Not a casual, hey, recite something fun, but the life-upending, destiny-reshaping kind of recite. You don't see it firsthand, of course. You're a few miles away, bartering for camel cheese and getting sunburned. But the ripple reaches you fast, within years. This message, the oneness of God, the need for compassion, prayer, community, and justice spreads across Mecca, then Medina, and then much, much farther. You join a caravan heading north. Every tent you pass seems to be whispering his name. Muhammad, prophet, messenger, revolutionary. People either love him or fear him, often both. Mecca's elites try to silence him, then exile him, then finally go to war with him. Spoiler, they lose. And so begins the transformation of the Arabian Peninsula. Cities once feuding over wells are now united under a single faith. The Quran becomes not just scripture, but blueprint, governing how to pray, eat, dress, treat your neighbor, and structure a society. You're amazed. You've seen kingdoms crumble over bad grain harvests. Here, an entire civilization is rising out of sand and poetry. Within a few decades, Islam spreads beyond Arabia. Not just by the sword, though, yes, war happens, but also through trade, treaties, and the magnetic pull of a fresh vision for life. You blink, and suddenly, entire empires are falling into this new orbit. Sassanid Persia, gone. The Eastern Roman holdings in Syria and Egypt, crumbling. You pass ruins still warm from retreating Byzantine soldiers. And yet, in their place, you see order, new administration, tax systems, roads bustling again. One scholar you meet in Damascus tells you, "We do not inherit Rome. We write a new book." And they do. You visit a mosque for the first time in Kufa. There's no incense or statues, just open space, quiet reverence, and a rhythm of prayer that feels like waves against the shore. The people are poor. Many are recent converts. But there's a feeling here you haven't felt since Constantinople. Direction, purpose. Historians still debate whether the early Islamic expansions were motivated more by faith, economics, or politics. But you see it on the ground. People believing in something bigger than their tribes, their towns, their petty feuds. Of course, it's not all peaceful. You get caught in the swirl of one of history's first great religious schisms. It happens after Muhammad dies. He didn't leave behind a neatly typed succession plan. And so, well, humans do what humans do. Two camps emerge. Those who support Abu Bakr as the first caliph, later called Sunnis, and those who believe leadership should stay within Muhammad's family, through Ali, later Shia. You don't get a vote, obviously. You're just a guy trying not to die in the middle of a tense argument about theological nuance and dynastic politics. Eventually, this rift becomes more than a debate. It becomes battle lines, political dynasties, entire schools of law and philosophy, and it never quite heals. Still, the empire grows, fast, like dangerously fast. You hitch a ride with a merchant caravan headed east, only to discover that Islam has already reached as far as India's doorstep. You head west again, into North Africa, and see cities like Cairo and Kairouan rise almost overnight. And in all these places, you notice something odd. Books everywhere. Paper mills buzz. Scribes are copying Greek philosophy into Arabic, Persian poems into calligraphy. There's this bizarre hunger for knowledge. One man offers to pay you in spices if you can recite a line of Aristotle. You fail. He gives you a fig out of pity in Baghdad, though it'll rise to glory a bit later. You hear the early rumblings of the House of Wisdom, where scholars will eventually debate everything from medicine to astronomy to why camels kneel that way. Back in the West, people are still arguing about whether pigs are demons. You feel a tug. You've lived through Rome's collapse, Byzantium's survival, and now Arabia's explosion into history. It's dizzying. You sit in the shadow of a minaret and realize the center of the world has shifted. The torch of knowledge for the moment is burning bright in the lands of Islam. But you know how torches go in history. You take a last sip of spiced coffee. Yes, they invented that too. And begin your next journey. Europe is about to wake up, and it's not going to be pretty. You're back in Europe now, if you can call this patchwork of moody forests, drafty halls, and increasingly angry peasants a continent. But something's different. There's talk, murmurs in smoky halls, songs sung around fires, a name repeated like thunder through oak-beamed corridors and mossy monasteries. Charlemagne, you first hear about him from a terrified bandit, which isn't the most reputable source. Still, the man drops his stolen apples just to warn you. Don't mess with the man with the sword and the Pope's phone number. So, naturally, you head in that direction. It's the 8th century now, and Western Europe's been busy gluing itself back together with Latin prayers and military ambition. The Merovingian kings, remember them? Hairy guys with fancy names have become a little disappointing. Less ruling, more napping. So the real power shifts to their mayors. Think assistant managers, but with axes Enter Charles Martel, the Hammer. Seriously, that's what they called him. He's the grandfather of our main character, and he's famous for stopping Islamic forces at the Battle of Tours in 732 CE. Some call it a defining moment of Western history. Others say it was just a raid, and he got lucky. Historians still debate whether it was a pivotal clash or a well-timed skirmish with great PR. But you're not here for Charles. You're here for his grandson, a man whose name means Charles the Great. You make it to Aachen, a growing city of stone, steam, and ambition. And there he is, Charlemagne. He's taller than you expect. Most people are short, hunched from hard lives and bad diets. Charlemagne? He's massive. Beard like a lion, voice like thunder, crown like a salad bowl filled with gems. His eyes scan the room like he's playing chess on 5 boards at once. You don't speak unless spoken to. And he speaks. He doesn't just rule, he builds. Schools, churches, roads, even bats. He revives Latin literacy, even if his own handwriting looks like chicken footprints. He invites scholars from Ireland, Italy, and beyond. One guy, Alcuin of York, becomes the brain behind Charlemagne's intellectual renaissance. Together, they copy ancient texts and create a standardized Latin script, Carolingian, minuscule. Sounds boring, but your future font options owe it a lot. You witness a school being opened near the palace. Children of nobles and some clever peasants are being taught to read, to chant, to think. Not too much though. You wouldn't want them getting ideas. Then comes the big event. On Christmas Day, 800 CE, inside the majestic St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Charlemagne kneels in prayer. Pope Leo III sneaks up and plops a crown on his head. Surprise, you're now the emperor of the Romans. It's like the Roman Empire got rebooted with extra beards and fewer togas. You're there, sort of. You're watching from the back, wedged between a monk and a goat who got lost. But the symbolism isn't lost on you. Western Europe is back in the empire business. Charlemagne doesn't take it lightly. He travels his empire constantly, like a medieval road trip warrior. No summer palaces for him. He wants to see the swamps, meet the mayors, pet the cows. He implements laws, collects taxes, and tries, emphasis on tries, to bring some order. But ruling a vast empire is tricky when communication involves messengers on horseback, and half your nobles are semi-literate warlords who think loyalty is a type of sausage. Still, Charlemagne does something astonishing. He unites much of Western Europe under one banner. France, Germany, parts of Italy, all squinting in the same imperial direction. That said, his methods aren't all warm hugs and Latin lessons. He's deeply devout. And if you're not Christian, well, you might be forcibly baptized. Or worse, his Saxon campaigns are brutal. You witness villages burned, idols shattered, and pagans executed for refusing to convert. The massacre of Verdun is especially horrific. Thousands of Saxons killed in a single day. You feel the smoke in your throat. You don't sleep well that night. It's a jarring contradiction. A ruler both visionary and violent. Charlemagne dreams of a united Christian Europe, but isn't afraid to crush it into shape. On a lighter note, you attend one of his feasts: roast boar, honey-drenched bread, jugs of wine. A bard sings of his exploits, probably exaggerating. You think you hear something about him wrestling a bear. No one questions it. He listens to reports. He reads, or pretends to. He even tries to speak Greek. It's adorable. You imagine Byzantium snickering behind its golden curtains. That's the thing. Constantinople isn't thrilled. They've got their own emperor. One Rome was enough. Two? That's a theological nightmare and a political migraine. But Charlemagne shrugs it off. Let the East have its silks. He's got forests, iron, and a dream. You hang around his court longer than expected. Something about the place feels real. Not perfect, not peaceful, but real. And then one day it ends. Charlemagne dies in 814. You watch the procession from a hilltop. The church bells toll. 1,000 cloaks flutter in the wind. He's buried in Aachen Cathedral, under a slab that will one day bear the Latin words Carolus Magnus. His empire will not last. Within a generation, it fractures. His sons fight. His grandsons squabble. By the Treaty of Verdun in 843, the Carolingian Empire is divided into three. France and Germany begin to take shape in their awkward, feuding way. But you remember him, the man who made Europe believe, if only briefly, that it could be something more than scattered huts and bad soup. You continue your journey because something else is coming from the north, and it does not knock. You approach the looming stone walls of a castle with the cautious awe of someone who spent too long sleeping in pig sheds and dodging axes. These aren't the crumbling Roman forts of old. This is new power, new arrogance, built brick by backbreaking brick. And it's vertical. Welcome to feudal Europe, baby, where everything, power, land, marriage, taxes, vengeance, is stacked in a very polite pyramid. And you, naturally, are at the bottom. Let's talk about castles first, because you can't ignore them. These massive stone beasts are erupting all over the landscape, like acne on an overambitious teenager. They're not just homes, they're statements. A nobleman doesn't just want to protect his land from bandits or bored Vikings. He wants everyone within 20 miles to know that he owns you, your goats, and possibly the river you're drinking from. The first ones are wooden Mott and Bailey constructions, kind of like oversized tree houses with murder potential. But soon, the rich start showing off with stone keeps, drawbridges, moats, and those weird holes in the walls that archers shoot out of, but somehow still let in rain. You arrive at one just in time for a tournament. Now, don't picture elegant duels with clean-cut heroes in shiny armor. Think more metal-on-metal violence, too much mead, questionable facial hair, and a lot of yelling. Knights crash into each other like drunk shopping carts. One falls off his horse and is immediately trampled by a goose. It's Not as glamorous as the tapestries promised. Still, the crowd loves it. Flags wave, lords cheer, and a peasant sells day-old bread for the price of a pig. Ah yes, peasants. That's you, by the way. Unless you've somehow married into a noble family. Unlikely, given your current hygiene level. You're stuck in the lowest layer of the feudal sandwich. Here's how it works. The king owns everything, in theory. He grants land, called fiefs, to nobles, in exchange for loyalty, military service, and the occasional awkward holiday gift. Those nobles give chunks of their land to vassals, who give it to knights, who let peasants farm it. In return for most of the food, all of the taxes, and 0% dental care. It's like a pyramid scheme, except instead of vitamin supplements, it's grain and oats. And if you think peasants have it rough, you're not wrong. You work from sunrise to sundown. Your clothes are itchy. Your dinner is barley gruel and bread if you're lucky. But hey, at least you're legally tied to the land and can't leave without permission. Oh, wait. You do manage to sneak into a manor house at one point by pretending to be a lost loot player. Inside, you see a feast. Deer, boar, cheese that doesn't squeal. Lords and ladies gossip about marriages, property lines, and whose falcon recently ate whose cat. One lady, in silk, died with crushed bugs, tells a story about her brother's jousting accident. Everyone laughs. You do too, though you don't quite understand the punchline. Something about a horse sitting on a bishop. Feudal society isn't just about power, it's about performance. Everyone has a role to play. Nobles host banquets and throw money at the church. Knights train for war and write angsty poetry about women they'll never talk to. Serfs break their backs. And maybe, go to a village fair once a year where someone sells questionable sausages and dances in a bear costume. And above all this sits the church. Oh yes. The Catholic Church isn't just a religious institution anymore. It's a superpower. Cathedrals rise like mountains. Bishops live like princes. Monks copy books, grow herbs, and brew beer strong enough to time travel you into next week. You stay at an abbey for a month. The monks chant a lot. At 2 a.m., 5 a.m., 7 a.m. You get the picture. The abbey is beautiful. Carved stone, warm candlelight, beeswax, and old parchment in the air. The scriptorium smells like ink and burning ambition. They're cupping Bibles, yes, but also Plato, Aristotle, and a scandalously saucy medical text from Salerno. One quirky monk tells you about relics, bones, teeth, tunics of saints. People travel for miles to see them. Touching a saint's toe can apparently cure gout, headaches, or a bad marriage. You wonder what future generations will think of this. Then there's the Pope. He lives in Rome, wears a crown bigger than some helmets, and at this point has more power than most kings. He can excommunicate you, basically a spiritual cancellation, and no one wants that smoke. Kings kneel, emperors beg. The Pope says, jump, and half of Europe says, how high, your holiness, which leads you to investiture, a massive fight between popes and emperors over who gets to appoint bishops. Sounds boring? It is. But it also leads to excommunications, armies, marching, and a German king standing barefoot in the snow outside the Pope's door. for 3 days just to get uncancelled. Feudal Europe is weird like that. You wander from village to castle to abbey. Everyone's trying to climb higher. Even peasants dream, if not of riches, then of joining a monastery, or maybe marrying a merchant's daughter with clean hands. You meet a merchant in Champagne. Yes, the place. He's attending one of the great medieval fairs. Giant gatherings of traders, artists, jugglers, and pickpockets. You see spices from the east, glass from Venice, fur from the north, and enough loud shirts to make a peacock nervous. Trade is growing again. Cities are stirring. There's money in movement. But for now, most people stay put. Land is life. Loyalty is currency. And the idea of the individual? Let's just say you're still mostly a cog in a divine, feudal machine. You camp beneath the shadow of a cathedral one night. Its tower reaches toward heaven, but its foundation still rests on the backs of muddy, shivering souls like yours. It starts with a whisper, just a rumor, carried by a barefoot merchant trailing a cart full of garlic and wildly optimistic optimism. A war, he says, to take back Jerusalem. You blink. Jerusalem? You haven't heard that name since the monastery's dinner prayers. You chew your bread slower. A holy war, he adds, crossing himself dramatically. The Pope said it. And just like that, the fuse is lit. You're about to witness the Crusades. A long, messy, surprisingly well-documented explosion of faith, politics, loot, and misplaced armor. Let's rewind for context. It's 1095, and Pope Urban II stands on a platform in Clermont, France. Picture a crowd, peasants with mud still drying on their ankles, nobles bored of feasting, knights itching for glory, and maybe one guy who just thought there'd be free wine. Urban raises his hands and declares, Deus vult, God wills it. He paints a picture of Christian brothers suffering under Muslim rule in the Holy Land, of sacred places defiled, of sins forgiven, for anyone who takes up the cross and marches east. And then chaos. You're swept up in the flood. Knights sew red crosses onto their cloaks. Peasants grab pitchforks and rusty swords. Even kids are sharpening sticks. It's less a coordinated military campaign and more a spiritually charged road trip from hell. You join one of the first groups, heading east. It's called the People's Crusade, which is already a red flag. You walk alongside barefoot zealots, weeping monks, and a woman dragging her cow to see the Lord's tomb, led by a man named Peter the Hermit, who, honestly, looks like someone who's been yelling at squirrels for 10 years. You trudge through Europe with chants, hymns, and zero tactical planning. Spoiler, it doesn't go well. Before even reaching Constantinople, this ragtag group manages to antagonize nearly every local authority, starves itself on moldy turnips, and ends up getting obliterated by Turkish forces near Nicaea. You survive by hiding under a pile of extremely offended chickens. But the official First Crusade, that's different. A more professional army follows, led by highborn knights and counts. Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond of Toulouse, Bohemond of Taranto. Names that sound like cheese brands, but are in fact experienced warriors. Sort of. They march with grim determination through Byzantine lands, across Anatolia, and into the belly of conflict. You trudge beside them, one muddy step at a time. The logistics are horrifying. Water is scarce. Horses die. So do thousands of people. From hunger, dysentery, desertion, and the occasional self-inflicted sword wound. But they keep going. Why? Part faith, part politics, part we came this far, we might as well. And then Jerusalem. The city glimmers on the horizon like a mirage. You feel a strange mix of awe and dread. It's hot, dusty, and heavily fortified. The siege takes weeks. Ramps are built. Prayers are shouted. At one point, a priest marches barefoot around the walls, holding a cross, while the knights fire flaming arrows. Then the walls break. The crusaders pour in, and what follows is hard to watch. They kill indiscriminately. Christians, Muslims, Jews, men, women, children. The city drowns in blood and zeal. You hide in a crumbling bathhouse and listen to the screams. Historians still debate whether it was sheer madness, calculated terror, or the inevitable result of mixing religious fervor with dehydration and chainmail. Either way, it's not holy, but the Crusaders declare victory. A Christian kingdom is born in Jerusalem, complete with castles, feudal taxes, and imported European snobbery. You see knights lounging on carpets, awkwardly trying to eat dates with their gauntlets on. Some even try falafel, and for a moment, they believe they've won. But history doesn't stop for anyone. You hang around the Holy Land long enough to see the cracks form. Supplies are thin. The locals don't exactly welcome their new armored neighbors. Muslim forces start to regroup. You hear the name Saladin whispered in both awe and fear. By the time the Second Crusade rolls around, mid-1100s, everyone's nervous. You watch as kings like Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany try to do what their grandfathers did. Spoiler, they don't. The campaign fizzles. Morale drops. One knight actually dies trying to fight while wearing a full wool cloak in the desert. The Third Crusade? That's the celebrity one. You're there when Richard the Lionheart arrives. Charismatic, ruthless, dramatically sunburned. He clashes with Saladin like it's a medieval Marvel movie. Sieges, skirmishes, letters exchanged with surprisingly polite grammar. You admire Saladin. He's no cartoon villain. He's smart, pragmatic, and, unlike his enemies, knows when to stop fighting. He retakes Jerusalem in 1187, but lets many inhabitants live. Radical move for the time. You wander between camps, pretending to be a translator. You witness truces brokered over figs and grudges hashed out in Latin, Arabic, and broken Greek. The Crusades become less about Holy Land and more about power, prestige, and gold. Then comes the Fourth Crusade, a complete disaster. Instead of reaching Jerusalem, the Crusaders sack Constantinople in 1204. Yes, the Christian capital of the East. You watch dumbfounded as drunk soldiers loot churches, melt sacred relics for coins, and set fire to thousand-year-old manuscripts. They steal the 4 bronze horses from a racetrack. You wonder if they even know how horses work. You slip away before the city collapses fully. Byzantium, once your golden wonderland, is now a wounded, limping shadow. The later crusades blur together. Children's crusades that end in disaster. Northern crusades in the Baltic. Even one against fellow Christians in southern France. The Albigensian Crusade. Basically, a theological purge with swords. And yet, the crusading spirit doesn't fully die. It mutates. It shifts inward. Instead of fighting others, Christians begin turning on each other. Accusations of heresy rise. The Inquisition looms. You sit one night in a tavern, listening to a bard sing about brave knights and holy quests. Everyone claps, but outside, a beggar huddles near a dying fire, whispering the truth. We lost more than we won. Still, the Crusades changed everything. Trade routes open, ideas travel, silk, sugar, and Arabic numerals sneak into Europe's markets. People who once thought Jerusalem was a myth now know it's real and complicated. They bring back spices, carpets, knowledge of medicine, astronomy, and how to build a better arch. Even maps start to change. The world seems bigger now and bloodier. You lie awake that night, staring at the stars, wondering what all this holy war really meant and what's coming next. Because you hear a cough, just a faint one, from a traveler beside you. You hope it's nothing. It's not. You wake to the sound of coughing, not the delicate kind that says, "I need a sip of water," but the raw, wheezing kind that says, "Get out while you still can." You roll over in your straw bed and see the traveler from last night curled up in a corner, sweating through his tunic. His lips are dark. His breathing rattles. You back away slowly, but it's already too late. You are standing at the threshold of the Black Death, history's most infamous house guest. It doesn't knock. It kicks the door down. Let's set the scene. It's the 14th century now. Europe is getting crowded. Cities are bigger, markets busier, streets louder. Trade is booming. Ships sail in and out of Venice, Genoa, and Marseille. People are moving. Goods are moving. And so is something else. The plague begins quietly. A sailor dies in Messina. A merchant collapses in Constantinople. In Kaffa, a Genoese trading port on the Black Sea, there's talk of Mongol soldiers catapulting plague-ridden corpses over the city walls. Historians still debate whether that's fact or just the world's first biological warfare fanfic. But by the time you arrive in Italy, it's very real and spreading fast. You smell it before you see it. The scent of unwashed death clings to the air. In the alleys of Florence, dogs lie abandoned. Church bells toll endlessly. You see plague carts piled high. The dead are buried in mass graves. Some aren't buried at all. And the symptoms, grotesque. People wake up fine, then suddenly collapse. Buboes, large, swollen lymph nodes, erupt under arms and between legs. Black blotches bloom on skin. Blood spills from mouths, from eyes. Death follows in hours. No one knows what's causing it. Some say it's the Jews. Others say it's bad air. Others still think it's punishment from God for too much gambling and wine. You, personally, suspect the rats. And you're right, mostly. The bacterium Yersinia pestis rides into town on fleas, which ride on rats, which ride on boats. Medieval Uber, really? But understanding doesn't matter. The plague doesn't care if you pray, bathe, or read Aristotle. It sweeps across Europe like a cold wind laced with knives. You flee north. In France, you see priests marching with burning incense. Flagellants whip themselves in public squares, begging God for mercy. Some towns build bonfires to purify the air. Others burn accused witches, foreigners, or entire Jewish communities in a desperate grasp for control. You hide in a monastery outside Paris for a while. It's quiet, too quiet. One morning, you wake up to find every monk dead. They died praying. You bury them yourself. You walk for days, weeks. Cities become ghost towns. Villages are abandoned. Crops rot in the fields because no one is left to harvest them. Cats roam freely. Dogs grow wild. You see a knight's armor discarded on the side of a road like it's trash. In London, the smell hits you from miles away. The Thames is choked with corpses. Graves overflow. Priests stop attending funerals. Doctors wear beaked masks stuffed with herbs, thinking they can block the bad air. They look like birds that regret their career choices. You volunteer at a makeshift hospital once. You hold a woman's hand as she dies. She says her name is Alice. She asks you to pray for her. You do. She doesn't last the night. The death toll is unimaginable. 1/3 of Europe's population gone. Some estimates say half. That's 25-50 million people in just a few years. It's a reset button. Horrifying, tragic, but also transformative. Because when the plague finally slows down, it never really ends, just retreats. Everything is different. With fewer people, labor becomes valuable. Serfs start demanding wages. Some leave their manors entirely. Lords panic. Kings try to pass laws freezing wages. Peasants rebel. You witness one of these rebellions in England. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381. They storm London. They kill officials. They demand rights. Their leader, Wat Tyler, is killed during negotiations. The revolt fizzles, but the fear remains. The idea that ordinary people might realize their power. That sticks. Even the church stumbles. So many priests died, that entire generations go unbaptized. Corruption grows. People begin to whisper, if God let this happen, is the church really in charge? You sit in a tavern in Prague, listening to a firebrand preacher named Jan Hus talk about reform, truth, and the need to strip the church of its gold. People cheer. You cheer too, quietly. Later, you see Hus burned at the stake, but the seeds of change are planted. The Black Death didn't just kill bodies. It killed the myth that the world was unchangeable. The feudal system, the all-powerful church, the idea that your birth decided your worth. These all crack, and into those cracks, something new begins to grow. Art innovation, rebellion, individuality, even fashion changes. People dress louder, brighter. They wear short tunics, crazy hats, shoes that curl like pasta. It's like they're saying, we survived. We might as well look ridiculous. You walk past a street performer, juggling skulls. He grins at you and says, Memento mori. Remember death. You do. But you also remember what comes after. Because the world, bruised, weeping, but alive, is stirring again. And you, somehow, are still walking, still breathing, still watching the story unfold. You're starting to notice something strange. People aren't just surviving anymore. They're building, dreaming, sketching new worlds on parchment, sculpting angels out of stone, singing in polyphony, painting with perspective, reading not just Bibles, but books about stars, medicine, and how to properly roast a duck. It's not a revolution. It's more like a whisper at first, growing into a shout. Welcome to the Renaissance. Born not in royal halls, but in cramped workshops and cluttered studios. And yes, you're still technically in the Middle Ages. The lines are blurry. Don't overthink it. You arrive in Florence, Italy, in the early 1400s. It smells like fresh bread, marble dust, and ambition. The plague has retreated, mostly. The Crusades are a memory, and suddenly, everyone's acting like the ancient Romans were influencers with abs. You meet a banker named Cosimo de' Medici. Modest robe, not so modest bank account. His family runs the city without technically ruling it. Very subtle. He funds art, architecture, philosophy. His house has more books than a monastery. One room is just for arguing about Plato. You sneak into the cathedral workshop and meet a man named Brunelleschi. He's building a dome so massive, it scares everyone, including himself. The Duomo rises above the city like a crown of red brick. You ask how he's keeping it from collapsing. He grins and says, "You wouldn't understand." He's right. Art explodes. Donatello is sculpting saints with too much sass. Fra Angelico is painting heavens so blue they make you blink. And then there's Botticelli, painting the birth of Venus like it's a fashion ad for divinity. You hear words like humanism, perspective, patronage. You pretend to understand them. What you do understand is this: people are learning again. Reading Arabic translations of Greek texts brought back from the Crusades. Studying the stars, not to divine omens, but to chart celestial motion. It's not just Italy. You visit Paris, Prague, Cologne. Cathedrals still rise, but so do universities. Students in too long robes argue about Aristotle and drink bad wine. You attend a lecture in Bologna and leave with a headache and a mild crush on the professor. In England, you hear of a man named Geoffrey Chaucer who writes in English, actual, muddy, earthy English. You sit by a fire and listen to tales of millers, knights, and suspiciously smart wives. It's like hearing the Middle Ages laugh at itself. But here's a twist. The church is nervous because knowledge, once their monopoly, is leaking. People ask questions now. You meet a young man in Mainz named Johannes Gutenberg. He's fiddling with metal letters, ink, and wine presses. He mutters about movable type. You pat him on the back and say, "Good luck." He changes the world. 6 months later, suddenly, books are everywhere. Cheap ones, portable ones, dangerous ones. Ideas are reproducing like rabbits. You feel it in the air. Change is coming. But change makes kings nervous, and popes even more so. The printing presses haven't even cooled, and already the world's spinning faster than anyone can handle. You're back in Germany, early 1500s now. A cold wind whips through cobbled streets. People huddle in taverns, sipping beer and muttering about indulgences, corruption, and a particularly mouthy monk who refuses to shut up. You look up, and there he is, Martin Luther, the man who's about to shatter Western Christianity with a hammer and some extremely spicy theology. It starts with 95 theses, nailed to a church door in Wittenberg in 1517. Not a full-blown rebellion, more like an open letter written in caps lock. He's mad about indulgences, those handy little certificates the church sells to get you or your dead relatives out of purgatory faster. A divine fast pass. Basically, Luther calls it what it is, a scam, but his critique hits a nerve. Because it's not just about indulgences, it's about power. Who controls salvation? Who interprets scripture? Why does the Pope get to build cathedrals with poor people's pennies? You attend one of Luther's sermons. He speaks in German, not Latin. The crowd leans in. The Bible, he says, belongs to everyone. You feel it. Something has cracked permanently. And guess what helps spread his ideas? That printing press you saw back in Mainz. Within months, Luther's pamphlets are everywhere. Translated, recopied, debated, burned, and recopied again. He becomes a viral sensation, 16th century style. The church responds by doing what it does best, trying to shut it down. At the Diet of Worms, no, not lunch, Luther is summoned to recant. The Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, is there, wearing enough gold to blind a goat. You sneak in, wearing a borrowed monk's robe. Luther stands firm. Here I stand. I can do no other. Mic drop. He's excommunicated, declared an outlaw, and spirited away by allies to hide in a castle where he does something even more radical. He translates the Bible into German. You help sharpen quills. Soon, Europe is on fire. Not literal fire. Well, some literal fire, but ideological fire. The Protestant Reformation spreads from Germany to Switzerland, Scotland to Sweden. Each region reacts differently. Zwingli starts preaching in Zurich, then dies in battle. Calvin sets up a rigid theological dictatorship in Geneva. Henry VIII, in England, mostly wants a divorce, but ends up with his own church by accident. You bounce between countries, trying to keep up. Everywhere you go, churches split. New sects appear like mushrooms. People argue over bread, wine, music, infant baptism, and whether or not Sunday dancing sends you straight to hell. It's chaos. Sacred chaos. But creative too. You visit a Protestant workshop in Nuremberg, where artists are painting biblical scenes in woodcuts, raw, bold, and personal. You attend a Lutheran hymn, sing along, and actually enjoy it. Then you're almost trampled in a Catholic procession, featuring enough incense to knock out a bear. Because yes, the Catholics fight back. Welcome to the Counter-Reformation. It starts with the Council of Trent, 1545-1563, a theological endurance marathon where Catholic leaders reaffirm their doctrines, fix internal corruption, and double down on their turf. Then come the Jesuits, a new order of priests, scholars, and educators who are simultaneously terrifying and brilliant. You meet one in Paris who speaks 5 languages, teaches math, and can kill you with a rosary if necessary. The Church also unleashes the Inquisition and the Index of Forbidden Books. You nearly get arrested for reading a poem about the moon. The Reformation fractures Europe, not just spiritually, but politically. Princes use it to defy emperors. Kings use it to seize church lands. Peasants, remember them? Start asking if maybe, just maybe, God doesn't actually want them to be poor forever. In 1525, you're caught in the middle of the German Peasants' War, a bloody revolt inspired in part by Reformation ideals. Luther, surprisingly, sides with the nobles. You narrowly escape a burning barn and decide peasant revolutions need better planning. By the 1550s, Europe is no longer unified by faith. It's a quilt of Catholic and Protestant enclaves, stitched together with suspicion, gunpowder, and diplomatic lies. You try to attend a mass in one town and get spat on for being a papist. In the next, you're accused of heresy for singing a hymn too enthusiastically. You start carrying both a Bible and a disguise. And still, the ideas spread. Freedom of conscience, direct access to scripture, individual salvation, radical stuff. The Middle Ages, it seems, are crumbling, and yet people still wear chainmail. You stay one night in a village in Saxony. A storm rages outside. A girl reads the Bible aloud to her grandmother. A candle flickers on the windowsill. The church bell rings. You're not sure if it's Catholic or Protestant, but it's still holy and still human. You wake up in a tavern in Antwerp with a headache. a half-eaten pretzel, and a conversation unfolding in 5 different languages around you: German, French, Spanish, Dutch, Latin. You're in the age of empire, baby. Trade is booming. Cities are rich. The world's map is stretching, bending, cracking. Someone at the next table is trying to sell nutmeg for the price of a horse. Someone else is scribbling financial schemes on parchment like it's Wall Street. And you just want a clean cup of water and to not get conscripted. But the Middle Ages aren't over yet. They're just mutating into something wide. You walk out into the harbor and see ships, giant ships, with high wooden decks and sails puffed like the cheeks of overeager politicians. Flags from Portugal, Spain, Venice, even England flap in the wind. Men load barrels of salted fish, wine, wool, and weird little monkeys in cages. Because the world is open now and about to be colonized, you sail south, following the whispers of gold and spices. You land in Lisbon, where explorers are treated like saints, even when they get half their crew killed. You hear the name Prince Henry the Navigator, who never actually navigated anything but poured money into map-making, ships, and dreams of circling Africa. Then you meet Bartolomeo Diaz, who rounds the Cape of Good Hope like it's a casual afternoon jog, and Vasco da Gama, who reaches India and declares it profitable, very profitable. You pause in Spain and witness an awkward but very famous couple, Ferdinand and Isabella. They've united Aragon and Castile, kicked the last Muslim kingdom, Granada, out of Iberia in 1492, and suddenly have cash and confidence, which leads them to fund a certain Italian with bad maps and better charisma, Christopher Columbus. You don't like him at first, too smug, too desperate, but you board the Santa Maria anyway. The journey is long, the ocean is vast, people cry, rats cry. You cry, and then land, the Caribbean, not Asia, as Columbus insists with the stubbornness of a man who refuses to ask for directions. You step onto an island where the trees are tall, the birds are louder than sin, and the local people look nothing like anyone has ever described in Europe. At first, it's all awkward exchanges and shiny trinkets. Then it gets darker, fast. Colonization begins. Gold is seized. Locals are enslaved. Whole cultures, complex, sacred, rich, are crushed under the boots of Europeans, convinced they're doing God's work. You see ships packed with sugar, with people, with things that should never belong to anyone. You retreat. Europe is celebrating. The Columbian Exchange is in full swing. Crops crisscross the ocean. Maize, tomatoes, and potatoes arrive. Syphilis shows up to the party and does not leave. In return, Europe sends smallpox, guns, and an obsession with land ownership. And suddenly, the map doesn't fit on one page anymore. You return to Spain and meet Hernán Cortés, who's heading west with dreams of gold and zero ethical concerns. You pass him a flask and say, "You're gonna need it." Back in Europe, the influx of silver from the New World is fueling kingdoms. Spain becomes rich, and then somehow immediately in debt. Prices rise. Merchants become nobles. Nobles become broke. Monarchs become absolute. You visit France and meet France's tourists. Big on war, bigger on art. Builds palaces like someone's chasing him. Across the border, the Habsburgs are collecting crowns like Pokemon cards, eventually creating a dynasty that rules half of Europe and most of the Americas. And beneath it all, regular people are still dying of plague, mud, childbirth, famine, and rent. The gap between the powerful and everyone else is growing. And so is the idea that maybe that's a problem. You attend a dinner party in Florence. Artists talk about anatomy. Philosophers mention the soul of man. One woman quotes Cicero while carving roast duck. It's beautiful and terrifying because even as the world expands outward, tensions at home are tightening fast. Religious wars, economic collapse, urban riots, and because why not? New wars that feel old. You wander into Italy's endless battlefield, where France and Spain take turns punching each other over cities like Naples and Milan. It's confusing, it's expensive, and no one wins. You flee north. In Germany, you hear more talk of Protestant Catholic bloodshed. Families are split. Cities are burned. The Reformation isn't just spiritual. It's political dynamite. But amid the chaos, something remarkable happens. You visit Antwerp again, this time to meet a man named Gerardus Mercator, a mapmaker who's trying to project the round earth onto a flat surface. He draws lines, curves them, realizes he's accidentally redesigned how future generations will see the world. You watch as cartographers, explorers, and theologians all argue in the same tavern. One wants to circumnavigate the globe, one wants to save it, and one just wants to know if chicken counts as meat on Fridays. The Middle Ages are ending. Not with a bang, not with a coronation or a bell toll, but with a ship, a book, a question. You walk the docks one last time. A new ship is leaving. No one knows where it'll end up. You step aboard and let the wind take you. The sea mist clings to your face like unanswered prayers. You're somewhere near the coast of the Netherlands now. Flat land, flat accents, and a society that seems suspiciously well organized. Canals cut the cities like threads through cloth. Windmills spin lazily. Tulips bloom where mud once ruled. And the people? They're reading. A lot. Welcome to the Dutch Golden Age, where trade ships outnumber churches, and the air smells faintly of oil paint and fish. But we're still dragging the tail end of the Middle Ages behind us. Europe is a fragile vase, glued together with treaties, creeds, and mutual distrust. The wars of religion have splintered unity. The Reformation didn't solve conflict. It simply redecorated it in matching black robes and contradicting translations of the Bible. Take the 30 Years' War. It begins in 1618 with a defenestration. Yes, literally someone being thrown out a window in Prague. Catholic messengers crash land in a pile of manure. And that's all the excuse anyone needs to go berserk. You don't even try to pick sides anymore. Protestant, Catholic, Calvinist, Lutheran, Habsburg, Bourbon, Saxon, Swedish, French, Bohemian. You've stopped keeping track of which alliance just backstabbed, which cousin. You roam through burning towns. You see mercenaries paid in plunder and bread crusts, villagers hiding in wells, churches turned into stables, mothers bearing children under apple trees. By the end, somewhere around 1648, everyone is exhausted. The Peace of Westphalia is signed. Not so much a triumph of diplomacy as a collective, let's just stop before we all die. The war leaves 8 million dead. Some cities never recover. Some ideas never die. But here's the twist. Even as the sword swings, science awakens. You walk through the halls of a Leiden laboratory and meet a quiet man with wild eyebrows and glass slides. Antony van Leeuwenhoek. He's not a noble, not a theologian. He's a cloth merchant with a microscope. And through his lenses, he sees tiny creatures, invisible worlds, the first bacteria, the first glimpse at the unseen universe. You laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's absurdly hopeful. The universe is bigger than we thought, and smaller, much smaller. Back in Italy, you run into Galileo. He's busy pointing a telescope at Jupiter and declaring that Earth is not the center of everything. The church disagrees strongly. He's forced to recant and spends the rest of his life under house arrest. You bring him biscuits. Meanwhile, Isaac Newton is born. You don't meet him yet, but the wind shifts. Europe is changing. You head to England, expecting feasts and fox hunts. Instead, you find a king, Charles Dauphin, with too many enemies and a dangerously dramatic haircut. He believes in divine right. Parliament disagrees. You stand in the crowd when they cut off his head. It's shocking, not because of the blood, but because it's legal. A king executed in public by his own people. You meet Oliver Cromwell, who runs England like a somber substitute teacher with too much authority. No dancing, no theater, no Christmas. Eventually, even England gets tired of itself and restores the monarchy. But the damage is done. The idea of divine kingship is bleeding out. Elsewhere, people are building empires. The Dutch dominate trade. The Portuguese plant colonies. The Spanish run silver mines with cruelty and vigor. And the French? The French are designing wigs so large they need support beams. You attend a ball at Versailles, built by Louis XIV, the Sun King. It's an explosion of chandeliers, lace, powdered noses, and strict social etiquette. You bow too shallowly and almost get exiled to Brittany. Louis says, "L'État, c'est moi." I am the state. You write it down. You also underline it 3 times, with a sigh. In Vienna, the Habsburgs continue their careful empire building, marrying cousins like it's a national sport. In Russia, you hear rumors of Peter the Great, who's dragging his kingdom into modernity by force. Literally, he personally shaves beards off nobles, and through it all, whispers grow. Whispers of reason, liberty, and the rights of man. You sit in a Paris cafe and listen to men named Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau argue about government, nature, and whether people are basically good or irredeemable swine. You have no answers, but you sense that the Middle Ages, with their feudal contracts, their divine kings, their plagues and pilgrimages, are done. The world has become loud, industrializing, colonizing. The age of faith gave way to the age of reason. And you, the eternal traveler, are starting to wonder what comes after all this enlightenment. Because when you peel back the lace, the gold, the powdered philosophies, you still hear coughing, you still see wars, you still feel the old world bleeding through the seams of the new. You're in a coffee house in London, sipping something bitter and overpriced, when the floorboards tremble, not from an earthquake, but from an idea. Across the room, a man in soot-streaked sleeves slams a copper kettle on the table and says, "Steam." You look up, and just like that, the Middle Ages finally leave the room. You're standing on the edge of the Industrial Revolution. Not quite modern yet, but no longer medieval. It's loud, it's hot, it smells like coal smoke, wet wool, and ambition. The year is somewhere around 1750. The old rhythms of the feudal world, plant, harvest, pray, repeat, are breaking like a badly made loom. You wander through Manchester, once a sleepy village. Now it roars with textile mills. Giant machines clatter day and night. You watch as threads stretch across massive frames. Children with nimble fingers dart between gears. A man with wild eyes talks about efficiency while coughing up black dust. This is the age of machines, and no one's ready for it. People are leaving farms by the thousands. They cram into cities with no plumbing, no space, and no unions. You rent a room the size of a wardrobe, share it with a family of 5, and sleep beside a puddle that might actually be moving. But look closer. What's happening is more than just noise and steam. It's the death of isolation. Villages no longer live in their own time bubbles. Goods, ideas, diseases, fashions, they all travel faster now. Roads improve. Canals snake across landscapes. The first railways spark to life. You ride a steam train for the first time, wedged between sacks of flour, and a man discussing coal prices like he's reciting poetry. The train jerks forward. You hear the whistle. The countryside becomes a blur. Back in London, you meet James Watt, the man perfecting the steam engine. You ask him if he understands what he's unleashing. He says, "Not really." You visit a printing press, now powered by steam. Thousands of newspapers roll off the belt. One headline reads, "King coughs, nation prays." Another says, factory fire kills 39. Owner unshaken. You shake your head. Same world. Faster gears. But don't think the old world is gone just yet. In the countryside, lords still sip wine under oil paintings of ancestors who never smiled. But they're losing grip. The old aristocratic order is getting outbid by factory owners, bankers, and merchants with no bloodlines, but plenty of receipts. You attend a ball thrown by a duchess. The chandeliers glitter, the music swells, and someone behind you mutters, "She married a coal baron's son." Scandalous, but unavoidable. You find yourself wondering, what's fueling all this? The answer is twofold: raw material and exploitable labor, which means, you guessed it, the empire's appetite just got hungrier. You sail to India, where the British East India Company is more than a company. It's a government, in all but name. You watch as taxes are extracted, revolts crushed, cotton exported, and English clerks pretend they understand Sanskrit. You travel to Africa, where European traders exchange guns for people. The transatlantic slave trade still shuttles millions in horrifying conditions. You hold your breath on a ship bound for Jamaica and wonder how anyone can justify this. Then someone says, "It's profitable." You sit down. You watch wealth pour into Europe. Sugar, tobacco, rubber, ivory, tea. You also watch resistance rise. In Haiti, enslaved people revolt. Successfully. You witness the Haitian Revolution, led by Toussaint Louverture, where the oppressed burn plantations and rewrite history. France, stunned, tries to fight back. You see generals flee. You cheer. But Europe's powder keg is still building. You feel it in Paris, 1789. Bread prices soar. Crowds gather. A prison called the Bastille is stormed. Heads roll. The French Revolution begins. Not medieval peasant rebellion, but ideological warfare, with pamphlets and guillotines. You stand on the edge of a public square as the King of France is executed by his own people. Not because he sinned, but because he represented a system too old, too unfair, too broken to continue. Sound familiar? Revolution doesn't end there. It mutates. Napoleon rises, cannonballs blazing, democracy in one hand, imperial ambition in the other. You follow him across Europe until his horse finally quits near Moscow and his dreams drown at Waterloo. And then more nations rise, more wars, more borders. But the feudal world, the one where birth decided your place and priests told you why, it's gone. Burned in the fires of factories, rewritten in the language of rights, reason, and revolutions. You stand at the edge of a spinning world, dizzy from the speed, deafened by the engine's hum, and you whisper, "So this is what comes next." The bells are quieter now, not gone, just muffled by factories, train whistles, and the din of cities overflowing with ambition. You stand on a balcony overlooking Vienna, 1815, a city pretending it didn't just survive a continental bloodbath. The old kings and diplomats are here, sipping brandy and redrawing borders at the Congress of Vienna, trying to pretend Napoleon was a fluke, that the Enlightenment was just a phase, that revolutions can be folded up like bad origami. But you see it, the seams don't hold anymore. Europe is no longer a medieval chessboard of fiefs and loyalties. It's a pressure cooker, and someone just turned up the heat. You wander through Prussia, where nationalism simmers under a veneer of order. Through Italy, where artists and merchants whisper about unification. Through the Balkans, where empires keep drawing lines no one respects. The medieval idea of empire, Catholic, divine, eternal, is wheezing in a chair somewhere. Now it's industrial, militarized, armed with newspapers. And the people? They've had a taste of agency. In the taverns, they quote Rousseau and drink cheap gin. In the alleys, pamphlets circulate faster than police can confiscate them. Everyone has an opinion now. On voting, on rights, on kings, on whether or not it's acceptable to publicly defenestrate a corrupt mayor. Spoiler, it is. You arrive in Paris again. This time, it's 1848. A wave of revolutions spreads across Europe like a chain reaction. Crowds gather, flags rise, barricades go up, old regimes totter, a few fall, a few cling on. You see students with rifles, women sewing banners by candlelight, priests blessing rebels, and monarchs in the same breath. It's passionate, messy, loud, and temporary. Most of the revolutions fail. But the idea? It doesn't die, because even as monarchs return, they do so sheepishly, with parliaments, with limits, with the knowledge that their crowns now sit on borrowed time. And then, unification. You meet Bismarck in Berlin, a man who speaks softly and carries multiple armies. He unites Germany, not with poetry, but with iron and blood. You dodge cannonballs at Sedan. Watch a new empire rise from the smoldering ruins of French pride. In Italy, Garibaldi rides with red-shirted revolutionaries, fighting popes, kings, and apathy in equal measure. You see cities stitched into a nation by sheer will and stubborn facial hair. But don't think it's all idealism. The new powers behave suspiciously like the old ones, just with railroads and rifles. You stand in the heart of London, now the capital of the largest empire the world has ever seen. The British Empire stretches from Canada to India to New Zealand. The sun, they say, never sets on it. You mutter, neither does the guilt. You travel to India, where Queen Victoria is now Empress. You witness rebellions, massacres, and the strange contradiction of railways laid across famine-ravaged provinces. You cross into China, where opium flows faster than diplomacy. You sit in on an awkward trade negotiation that ends with gunboats and an unequal treaty. Another echo of the Crusades, but with tea instead of relics. And then there's Africa, scrambled, carved, colonized, at the Berlin Conference, like it's a buffet. You hold your breath, because even as the world modernizes, it still burns villages. Even as kings fall, new tyrants rise. Even as the medieval walls crumble, the old instincts survive. And now, you can feel it coming. Something bigger, faster, hungrier. You look at the rail lines, the smokestacks, the maps filled with red and blue. And you know, the Middle Ages are finally gone. But the darkness, not yet. You wake to the sound of drums. Not medieval ones carved from goatskin, but mechanical, tight, militarized. A brass band marches down a Berlin street, uniforms gleaming like coins, boots pounding pavement. You're not in the Middle Ages anymore. You're in modern Europe, 20th century, peeking over the horizon, and it's wearing a helmet. The castles still stand, the cathedrals too, but they're now flanked by smokestacks, telegraph poles, and government buildings with typewriters clacking like machine guns. You feel it in the air. Anticipation, tension, something enormous, like thunder behind wallpaper. You follow a young man in a tailored suit into a university in Vienna. He's studying Freud, sketching Nietzsche's name in the margins, and debating whether God is dead or just really tired. You sip weak coffee and realize something dangerous. The thinkers are now questioning everything, not just the Pope, not just kings, but truth itself. And just when you think the Middle Ages are safely behind, they rear up again, this time in ideology. Nationalism has replaced feudal loyalty. Borders become identities. Flags become weapons. The loyalty once sworn to lords is now offered to nations. And those nations, they don't like each other very much. You stand in Sarajevo in 1914. The car passes. A man named Gavrilo Princip steps forward. A shot rings out. 2 lives end. And the century, your century, detonates. World War I begins not with a heroic charge, but with telegrams and treaties. You travel by train to the front. Watch as millions are mobilized by rail, organized by punch card, and marched to the trenches. And you, oh, you wish you hadn't come. Gone is the knight in shining armor. Gone the swordplay and romantic battles. This war is mud, gas, barbed wire, and rats. You sleep in a trench outside Ypres. It rains for 5 days. Men drown in holes shallower than your bathtub. On soldier shows you a photo of his dog. He dies the next morning. You bury him with a spoon. This is the death not just of men, but of meaning. The war eats poetry, devours purpose. You hear machine guns stutter like demons, clearing their throats. Horses charge into tanks. Men write letters that never arrive. When it ends in 1918, no one celebrates. Not really. They're too numb, too hollowed. The Austro-Hungarian Empire collapses. The Ottoman Empire crumbles. Monarchs fall like dominoes. Czars are executed in basements. Crowns traded for silence. And then, a pause. You go to Berlin again. The Weimar Republic glimmers briefly like a bubble. Cabarets and philosophers, jazz and expressionist paintings. Everything's beautiful and broken and terrified of tomorrow. Then inflation hits. People will borrow money to buy bread. In Italy, a man named Mussolini struts in black, shouting about glory. In Russia, Lenin dies, and Stalin sharpens his tools. In Germany, a failed artist with a mustache begins shouting into microphones. You don't want to believe it, but by the time you return in the 1930s, books are burning, and the world, it's building new trenches, but this time in concrete. You flee across borders as fascism spreads. You hear sirens in Prague, gunfire in Madrid, propaganda on every frequency. And then, 1939, you're in Warsaw when the sky falls. You don't see the bombs at first. You hear them, a low whine, like a prayer stretched too thin, followed by the sickening thud of the ground, remembering it can be shattered. Welcome to World War II, the moment where everything built since the fall of feudalism collapses into fire. You're in Warsaw, September 1939. German tanks roll in like clockwork, smooth, fast, unapologetic. The Polish cavalry charges them on horseback because it's all they've got. The crowd at the train station holds its breath. The medieval world once ended in mud and plague. This one ends with blitzkrieg. You run, everyone's running, through fields, forests, border crossings that vanish with the stroke of a diplomat's pen. In Paris, you sip wine for 15 nervous minutes before the Nazis arrive. In London, you help tape windows, dig trenches, ration everything from butter to hope. The war is fast at first, then slow, then everywhere. You drift across continents. North Africa, where sand burns beneath tanks. Russia, where winter becomes a weapon. Japan, where the empire expands like ink in water, until it wakes, a sleeping giant. You cross the Pacific. You stand on the deck of an American carrier the moment Pearl Harbor is attacked. The news travels faster than fear. Radios choke on it. The world is now fully engaged. Industrialized destruction on a planetary scale. You land with troops in Normandy, June 1944. The sky cracks with gunfire. You hide behind a hedgerow and pretend not to cry. A soldier next to you sings softly. He's shot mid-chorus, and all the while, beneath the war, something even darker grows. You sneak into Auschwitz, pretending to be an electrician. What you see there, it breaks you. This isn't medieval torture. This is methodical, clean, efficient, bureaucratic. Hell with paperwork. You watch trains arrive. Families separated. Names become numbers. Smoke rises. You don't ask where it's coming from. You already know. This is what the death of God looks like when combined with nationalism and logistics. By 1945, you're in Berlin. Shells fall. The Reich collapses. Hitler dies in a bunker, swallowed by the madness he unleashed. But no one celebrates, not truly. Because by now, the atomic bomb has entered the conversation. You stand outside Hiroshima on August 6th. The sky goes white, then red, then nothing. When you open your eyes, a city is gone, just gone. And the Middle Ages, you miss them now? The swords, the plagues, the mud. Because at least they didn't vaporize children in a flash. But the war ends, not with parades, but with treaties, tribunals, and trauma. The United Nations is born from the rubble, trying to stitch together a planet held together with grief. You watch survivors walk home with nothing but the outline of a shadow behind them. You watch a new map of Europe take shape, one that slices Germany like a cold cake. The Cold War begins with silence. The sword becomes the bomb, and power, once held by kings, then parliaments, now belongs to anyone who can split an atom. You're standing at a checkpoint in Berlin. To your left, capitalism, jazz clubs, Coca-Cola, neon lights that never sleep. To your right, communism, red flags, gray buildings. A man staring too long. This is the Cold War. And Europe is now a chessboard, played by hands half a world away. You stare at the Berlin Wall, not just concrete and barbed wire, but a manifesto in stone, built overnight in 1961. It slices the city in two, like a scar you can't hide. East versus West, freedom versus control, genes versus ideology. You light a cigarette and try not to pick sides. Good luck. The war is over. But the world feels more dangerous than ever. Because now, the knights wear lab coats. The kings sit in war rooms. The bishops, they've been replaced by spy satellites and covert coups. You visit Moscow, 1957. The Soviet Union is flexing. Sputnik hums above your head. A metal grapefruit that says, "We got here first." Across the ocean, America panics. Science classes multiply. So do missiles. And you? You try to sleep. In Vietnam, you hear jungle birds mimic helicopters. In Cuba, you sip coffee 90 miles from mutual annihilation. The Cuban Missile Crisis lasts 13 days, and all of human history almost ends in a single blink. You hold your breath. The world does too. It passes, barely. But this isn't a war of swords anymore. This is a war of proxy, of ideology, of information. You ride a train through Eastern Europe, where breadlines are long and dissidents speak in whispers. In Poland, a man named Lech Wałęsa raises a union banner. In Hungary, students protest and tanks roll over dreams. And through it all, the church returns, not as ruler, but as a witness. In 1978, a Polish pope is elected, John Paul II. He speaks of faith, freedom, and dignity, and Eastern Europe listens. But the real cracks form in the economy. The Soviet system groans. Central planning can't feed the people. Shortages, empty shelves, typewriters locked up in offices so ideas don't leak. In 1985, A man named Gorbachev takes power. You meet him briefly at a conference where no one smiles. He says, glasnost, perestroika, openness, restructuring. You raise an eyebrow. He means it, sort of. But the system is too brittle, too afraid, too medieval in its fear of the crowd. By 1989, walls fall, literally. You stand at the Brandenburg Gate as Berliners rip the wall apart with their bare hands. Chunks of history flying like confetti. East and West embrace. The crowd sings. A man gives you a piece of the wall. You keep it. And then, 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves. Just vanishes. Like Byzantium. Like Rome. Like every empire before it. You sit alone in Red Square. Snow falls. No guards. No anthems. Just silence. It feels oddly medieval, because in the end, power never disappears. It just changes costume. The Cold War is over, but new lines are being drawn. Not kingdoms, not holy orders, but markets, corporations, code. The medieval world is gone, yes, but the human world, still full of fear, hope, banners and barricades. And you're still here, watching, listening, waiting for what comes next. The year is 2001. You're on a subway, reading a newspaper when the car stops, too suddenly. A voice crackles over the intercom. Something about New York. Something about planes. You surface. The world is different, not in the way that kings fall or maps are redrawn, but in that cold, unmistakable way history sometimes tilts beneath your feet. You watch live as the Twin Towers collapse, the sky smeared with smoke and confusion. Phones die. Sirens rise. Strangers clutch strangers. It's like watching the end of an era, but no one's sure which era. The Middle Ages had their holy wars. This feels like one too, but globalized, televised, weaponized. You see crusading language return. Good versus evil. Axis of terror, homeland. But this isn't Jerusalem. It's Kabul, Baghdad, Tikrit. And the nights? Now they're drones, satellites, night vision goggles. You follow troops into Afghanistan, then Iraq. You sleep in tents where sand creeps into your socks. You see schools rebuilt. You also see weddings bombed by mistake. The just war, like all wars, becomes messy, haunted, morally tangled. And at home, paranoia blooms. Security swells. Airports become rituals. You take off your shoes, your belt, your certainty. The age of information surveillance begins, not with a bang, but with a login. The medieval obsession with relics. Now it's data. Who owns it? Who profits? Who watches? You ride out the 2008 financial crash, watching empires built on credit crumble like sandcastles. Entire nations bailed out. People evicted. Governments wobble. Protests rise. Something deep and ancient rears its head again. Inequality. You hear it in the squares of Cairo, the streets of Athens, the tent cities of Wall Street. Protesters hold signs quoting Plato and Orwell. Some wear Guy Fawkes masks, anachronistic, poetic, medieval. In 2011, the Arab Spring ignites. Dictators fall. Hope soars. Then hope gets ambushed by realpolitik, civil war, and factional nightmares. You wander through Syria, a land as old as Genesis, now torn apart like parchment. You dodge snipers. You see a child play in rubble beside graffiti quoting Aristotle. And just as you think the fire's dimming, 2016, an election, a vote, a referendum, several actually, borders close, populism surges, history flexes its old angry muscles. You hear chants you haven't heard since 1381, peasants angry at distant elites, cities turning on themselves, facts debated like theology. You scroll on a phone. It's addictive, designed to be. Each swipe carries headlines, conspiracies, memes, cat videos, mass protests, and someone selling medieval armor on Etsy. The digital age is a mirror, showing us not how far we've come, but how deeply we still echo. You stand in a server room. It hums like a cathedral. Somewhere, algorithms determine the fate of elections, bank loans, love matches, all built by engineers who think they're immune to history. They're not. No one is. The Middle Ages were about belief, hierarchy, scarcity, fear, control. The modern world? Not that different. We still seek salvation, now in productivity, status, likes. We still fear the plague. Only now it comes with graphs and hashtags. We still build castles, gated communities with key cards and private guards. The world feels bigger. It also feels smaller. And still, the story rolls forward. You stare at a protester holding a sign. The system is broken. You whisper, it always was. It's 2025. You're lying on your back in a park, phone in hand, watching clouds scroll across the sky like social media posts you can't swipe away. Someone nearby is recording a TikTok about medieval bread recipes. A drone buzzes overhead. A child names their favorite knight from a video game. And just like that, the Middle Ages are back. Sort of. Not in mud or plague, but in memory. You scroll. Crusades reimagined. Black Death recontextualized. Vikings memified. A knight rides again, not for glory, but for views. But don't let the cuteness fool you. This is still a world forged in medieval fire. We're standing in the scaffolding, built across 1,000 years. Cathedrals, parliaments, constitutions, contracts, plagues, and power grabs. You're just looking at it through 5G. History isn't gone, it's embedded. The universal church. Now it's global tech. Faith replaced with terms and conditions. Saints replaced with influencers. And the relics? Now it's your data. Sacred, mined, monetized. You visit a university lecture on feudalism. The professor says, lords owned land, vassals pledged loyalty, peasants paid in labor. You look up from your phone and think, that sounds like my landlord, my boss, and my calendar app. You attend a startup pitch where someone describes a decentralized community governed by reputation, loyalty, and digital contracts. You raise your hand and ask, so, like a medieval guild? They blink, but we're not just reliving the past. We're confronting it, because everything old is surfacing again. Plagues, populism, climate panic, spiritual longing. The difference is that now, you can live stream it in 4K. You wander into a library, a real one. Books, dust, silence. You pull down a volume, labeled Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible. You open it and run your fingers across pages inked by a monk 800 years ago. His world was one of sin and salvation, of heaven and hell, and never enough daylight. And then you check your watch. Your Uber arrives in 3 minutes. You step outside and see a woman in chainmail cosplay buying organic hummus. Someone's dog is named Charlemagne. A teenager explains feudalism to their friend using emojis. In a nearby coffee shop, a laptop glows with a medieval strategy game being live-streamed to 2,000 viewers. And you realize, we never left. We're just telling the story differently now, with pixels instead of parchment. But the plot, still about power, fear, love, disease, death, and hope. You take one last walk through a city street, past a glass skyscraper shaped like a sword hilt, past a neon-lit basilica turned nightclub, past 2 men arguing over Aristotle's ethics while waiting for dumplings. And you smile, because the Middle Ages never ended. They evolved. And you've been there the whole time. From the Crusades to the cloud, from crossbows to code, from kingdoms to content. You turn off your phone, you close your eyes, and finally, you rest. Word count 3117. Series summary, 300 words. Over 20 immersive nights. History before bed. The Middle Ages, Crusades, Plague, and Power has taken you on a second-person journey through 1,000 years of human drama. You walked through the mud of feudal Europe, dined in candlelit halls, listened to Gregorian chants, echo off cathedral walls, and heard the whisper of plague carts rattling down cobbled streets. You stood in the Holy Land as crusaders clashed with Saracens. You watched popes and emperors arm wrestle for control of souls and taxes. You listened to peasants revolt, cities rise, universities open, and monasteries guard ancient knowledge like sacred flame. And then change came. Gunpowder, printing presses, plague, Renaissance, Reformation, science. You chased explorers around the globe, joined revolutions that screamed for liberty, witnessed the rise of factories, empires, ideologies, and finally, the brutal climax of the modern era, total war. But even in the 21st century, you felt the echoes, Algorithms wear crowns now. Tech moguls build digital fiefdoms. Global fears feel oddly medieval. Plague, fire, flood. The rise of false prophets. We may be post-medieval in tools, but not always in temperament. This wasn't just a story about kings and knights. It was about power and how it moves through ink, blood, prayer, and pixels. And you were there for every moment. So thank you for walking through time with me. Barefoot across cobblestones, boots deep in trench mud, or sneakers on airport tiles. The Middle Ages are over. Or maybe they've just rebranded. End of script. Good night.